I want to talk to you guys about how cults will contradict the very moral principles that they claim to be upholding. So, I've been reading this book. It's called Don't Call It a Cult, and it's about the cult of Keith Raniere. It's a fascinating read because it's not about any ordinary cult, because when you think of a cult, right, you think of something that has a semblance or an appearance of Christianity. You might think of Mormonism or the Jehovah's Witnesses, or you might think of David Koresh or Jim Jones, the Jonestown cult. You might think of these sorts of things, but what isn't really talked about as much as those are the cults that don't come in the name of Christianity, but rather are basically Hollywood or Silicon Valley cults. These are cults that will talk about tech and innovation, and they will promote meditation and maybe intermittent fasting, or things like that. And they will talk about self-help or unlocking your full potential, your full human potential. And it may seem harmless or it may seem cringe, but these types of groups can become dangerous, and they can become very eugenic. The Keith Raniere's cult was something akin to Scientology. It talked about unlocking your full potential, which Scientology does emphasize on, but Keith Raniere's cult didn't have any thetans or any sort of it didn't talk about space aliens. At least I haven't read that in the book so far. If it comes up, I'll let you guys know. So, Keith Raniere's cult talked about morals and ethics, and they even had ethics courses. They had a huge center in Albany, New York. That's where their main center was, and they had all sorts of classes, and these classes would last a super long time. We're talking like 12, 13 hours. And they would talk about ethics, and Keith Raniere was he was presented as the most moral man in the world. Not only the most moral man, but he was also upheld as the most intelligent man ever, the most intelligent man in the world, because they said that he had a very high score on the world's most difficult IQ test, although that IQ test has been brought into question many times. And people really believed that he was the smartest man in the world. They believed that he was so brilliant. And Keith Raniere had a lot of girlfriends. He had like over a dozen girlfriends. And all these girls were part of the cult. And he somehow convinced all of them that he was this genius and a perfect human. Guys, I'm telling you, if you're tired of being an incel, start a cult. So he had all these girlfriends, and of course, he was sleeping with all of them. And he would lie to a number of them, saying, "Oh, you're the only one," and blah 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 blah. And meanwhile, he was porking, 5 or 6 or 8 other women. And when you have that much sex, someone's gonna get pregnant, right? It's inevitable. Somebody's going to get pregnant, and a number of these women got pregnant. And what Keith Raniere would do is he would simply push them, pressure them to get abortions. There was one specific example involving a young Mexican girl by the name of Daniela. And Daniela was pregnant. She wanted the abortion, but Keith Raniere, of course, pushed her to have it, even though she wanted it anyway. And she had the abortion. But she later found out that numerous other women were compelled to have abortions. And Keith Raniere would teach that the reason why he wanted those abortions to happen was because he needed to have the perfect child. Because if he was going to have a child, that child was going to hold his genes. He needed to have a baby with the right person. So from being a cult or being an organization that instilled self-help and unlocking your full potential, this organization became very eugenist. And the reason why is very simple, is because when you're talking about unlocking your full potential, what eventually happens is that they start teaching that, well, not everybody's potential is equal, or these other people who are not with us their potential hasn't been unlocked yet, so they're inferior to us. Or members of the cult who have unlocked some of their potential, but they haven't unlocked all of their potential. So they're not ready to have children. They're not ready to propagate their genes with the superior Keith Raniere. So this cult became very eugenist. And there were a lot of abortions that were done. Meanwhile, Keith Raniere's acolytes were telling other people that Keith Raniere was celibate, that he wasn't having sex at all, and that he was still a virgin. But that was obviously a complete lie. Another thing also was how the cult began to try to hack the emails of their supposed enemies. So, for example, there were two sisters who were very high-ranking members of this cult. Their names were Sarah and Claire Bronfman. These were the heiresses of the or heiresses of the uh, of the or much of the massive amounts of wealth from their father, Edgar Bronfman. Edgar Bronfman was the heir to the very well-known distilling company Seagram's. You know, where you get Seagram ginger ale, which is very tasty. And Edgar Bronfman had numerous children, and so the sisters, Claire and Sarah Bronfman, they inherited millions of dollars each. So they had a lot of money, and of course, they were giving a lot of this money away to the cult. They probably gave all of their money away to Keith Raniere's cult. Edgar Bronfman found out about how much money they were spending on this cult, and he tried to convince his daughters to leave the cult, and of course they didn't listen. Keith Raniere then perceived Edgar Bronfman to be a major enemy to the cult, and so he wanted to hack his email. And he even had one of his daughters send Edgar Bronfman a corrupted code, which came as a nice, innocent photo of a bear, and she told her father to open up the picture to see a cute little bear, Dad. And of course, the dad didn't open it, and so she paid him a visit, and she went onto his computer and she opened it up for him and corrupted his computer, hacked his computer, and so the cult was able to hack Edgar Bronfman's email. Now, Daniela was she was basically like the main hacker in the organization because she taught herself how to code. And when Raniere told her to hack the emails of the cult's supposed enemies, Daniela at first objected to this, and she said, "I thought we were all about upholding ethics." To which Keith Raniere responded by saying that, yes, we are upholding ethics, but in order to advance our organization, our cult, which is going to bring ethics throughout the world, we need to break some of the rules for the greater good of the world. And this convinced Daniela, and of course, this was the ends justifies the means. And the problem with this sort of philosophy is that, yes, you can make the argument that the ends justifies the means, but what sort of means are you speaking of? And if that means is immoral and if it's destructive, then at the end of the day, you are a destructive person. At the end of the day, you have instilled within yourself that it is okay to be destructive, violent, murderous, and dishonest when it is to your advantage. And so, continuing this sort of philosophy in your life, at the end of the day, you're not even upholding the principles that you claimed to be advancing. And this leads me to the next part of this video, and that is a cult that I've been reading about for years now. This is the Wolf Pack cult, and this is probably one term out of numerous other terms for this type of movement. It's sort of a loosely networked cult. They call themselves, wolf packs wolf packs, and they say that they're part of a tribe. One of the intellectuals for this cult is Jack Donovan. There are numerous others, and they get together in, the boonies of various countries, and they do weird fire rituals, and they're pagans, and they talk a lot about being manly, and they're all deep into the deepest depths of the Manosphere, which is basically hell on this earth. People talk about, the dangers of feminism or the dangers of SJW, social justice warriors, and they say, look at these evil feminists. See, feminism is so evil. Well, yeah, feminism is a problem, don't get me wrong, but many people will react to feminism by becoming masculinist. And so you may have cults of femininity. You may have women who come out and say, well, I have a holy vagina, bow down to me. I am a small image of Mother Earth and Gaia. But then you have these men who will react to this and make a cult of masculinity. And they'll say, I'm a man, I'm superior to you. And at this point, it just becomes a rage-filled cult. And I was reading about one of the followers of this type of philosophy, this wolf pack philosophy. And just to add something to this, these are men who will cover themselves with pagan tattoos, even swastikas at times, Slavic swastika, Germanic swastika, whatever. And they will talk about fighting for their tribe and all this stuff. They're essentially intellectual terrorists, although followers of this sort of ideology have carried out violence. There was one case, I think in Virginia, where one of the members of this wolf pack tribe or wolf pack cult, he he set an historical black church on fire, and he ended up in prison for it. There was one guy by the name of Lyndon McLeod. Lyndon McLeod last year murdered 5 people, and he was a part. I don't want to say that he was like a member of a particular group, but he was definitely an acolyte and a follower of the philosophy and the ideology of people like Jack Donovan. This was a guy who pretended to be a good person, talked about how he was wronged by everybody, talked about how he was wronged by society, how the cops are evil, how the court systems are all evil and just destructive and tyrannical. And yet one day this guy gets a gun and goes into a tattoo parlor that he used to attend and he murders 2 people. He goes to the home of a former friend of his, and he tries to murder the husband and behead the wife. Luckily, those 2 survived because they got out of the house in time. He runs to a hotel where he executes the poor woman working behind the desk. At the end of the day, he murdered 5 people. Luckily, there was a female officer who confronted him. He shot the officer in the chest, and she returned fire and killed him. Thankfully, she survived. Thankfully, and it's quite ironic. Here was a man. I don't even want to call him a man. Here was a monster who was advancing this destructive ideology of being in this wolf pack tribe and covering yourself in tattoos and worshiping some crazy pagan gods that nobody worships anymore. Very few people worship anymore. Like pagan gods that have been forgotten for a long time. Only recently they have been revived, and they were replaced by Christianity a millennium ago. And they want to come back and say, let's revive the Viking religion, as if they have come up with something original and special. And here was a guy who said that women were useless, that women were inferior to him, and yet he was killed by a female police officer. That, my friends, is it's quite ironic. Anyway, you guys just heard some theology. God bless.